The neuro law guy, the guy who's an expert on AI and the law, is not an early adopter of technology?
I still read the hard copy newspaper. That's how I get my news, the Star Tribune. I had never posted on social media once until this campaign, and the campaign staff said, "You absolutely have to do that." I said, "Okay, I can do that. I can do a couple of these things, and I can record them. You're going to have to press some of the buttons here, kids."
This is not a good era to be getting into social media for the first time. We're at the low point of social media, so I imagine your replies are a mess.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
We are back on the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. My guest today, Francis Shen, is a professor of law at the University of Minnesota and a member of the Harvard Medical School Center for Bioethics. He's an expert at the intersection of law and neuroscience, as well as law and artificial intelligence. He's running for Hennepin County Attorney. That's why we're talking to him. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me and for having this forum available.
Let's begin with this. I've been asking this as the icebreaker with candidates. How have you been experiencing the last couple of months? What's been happening in your community? What have you been seeing and experiencing?
I think a lot. We've been out in community, out at Whipple, in the streets, at protest. The very first person I talked to in the campaign, who I didn't know, was the almost father-in-law of one of my campaign volunteers. He was detained, a 76-year-old Marine, a veteran, who was detained after being, pepper sprayed. And so it's been very personal. I was in the Whipple building just last week retrieving a phone and a wallet for someone who was wrongfully detained, taken to El Paso, returned to Wilmar, then there's a habeas, so then released. But when they released him just out into the cold air, no coat. They lost his phone and wallet. And of course, he was too scared to go back. So, his lawyer could go in and do that. So it's just been one thing after another. It's completely changed the trajectory of what we've been doing on a day-to-day basis. It's changed the tenor of conversation in the law school. We've had forums with students, and I think maybe in ways where it's expected, in ways unexpected. The word that comes to mind is just the cruelty that I've seen, and I'll just talk for a second about, since you asked about this release policy, because I've also seen the amazing community. I know many people have said this, and I've witnessed it too. So there was a mom and her child a number of weeks ago who saw what I saw. It was just somebody being released, with nothing, and so they just let that person come into their car to warm up and kind of call someone to pick them up. And they then made this little group, nonprofit, Haven Watch, which I'd encourage everyone to support. And we utilized a Haven Watch because we went out on a Saturday. We didn't know when they were going to release this friend, and so we left our card there. So I hadn't known about them till being out there. So it's it's the worst and the best of humanity in some ways. And so I'd say the positive silver lining is just, on like many people, signal chats and just trying to help out around. So yeah, it's changed just about everything. It's been the A topic on the campaign trail, and as it should be in that way too. But just permeating through the halls, through our house, everywhere.
And I'm not doxing you because this has been mentioned in articles about you. You live in the beautiful Bryn Mawr neighborhood of Minneapolis, which is not that far from the Wedge.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm in the. I've got a couple of friends down there, so I've shop at the Wedge Co-op regularly.
Are you friends with Lisa Goodman? Lisa Goodman is a neighbor. Do you know Lisa Goodman?
I don't know Lisa. Lisa used to live right around the corner, but she moved before we moved in. So okay. I don't know Lisa.
I think she still lives there, right?
Yeah, but I'm not right around the corner yet. But yeah.
So I had been looking into county attorney candidates, and A joke that I told about you after reading some material about you is that because I don't know, I'm not a neuroscience guy, I'm not a lawyer, and to see neuro law revolution, I think it people wonder what that is. And you throw in a bit of AI and you wonder, is this guy all about Minority Report stuff? Is this campaign themed on ideas from the plot of Minority Report? So can you reassure us your campaign's neuro law revolution has nothing to do with the plot of Minority Report?
Absolutely, and that's the line from this book that I'm finishing up, and I talk explicitly about Minority Report and is the Philip K. Dick version, what we're predicting. So, no, and in fact, one of the three things, we can get to the other two, but that I would just want, as absolutely I hope everyone would agree on, is a moratorium on the use of AI in that office until there are stronger ethical guidelines and training regimes in place. They're already using AI. Lawyers are everywhere. It's not unique to the county attorney's office. This is the first wave of our law student graduates and of attorneys who are just using it or having the opportunity to use it en masse. And it's happening without sufficient guidelines, and we do a lot of work in that space. The big idea with neuroscience and law, and no one's heard of it ever, and everyone asks, like, what is that? And that's one of the reasons I'm running. To me, is simple as this: law is in the business of governing human behavior, and the better we can understand why people make decisions, and the more individualized we can get in our response, the better the justice system can become. And lots of examples of that. But neuroscience is a field; it's not the only field, but it's a new field that's giving us better insight into those experiencing addiction, those who've experienced a lot of trauma, those who are navigating different types of mental illness. And unfortunately, many of those individuals come into the justice system. I think that would be better if there were a non-justice system that sort of handled some of this. But right now, in Hennepin County and most of the country in big cities, they become justice involved. And so that's really the kind of core thrust. But no, absolutely no Minority Report. In fact, I think the opposite. I think the skill set for attorneys, not just county attorney, but across the board, are becoming the need to govern that sort of technology, which just wasn't a skill you needed 10 years ago.
I mean, I feel like in Minneapolis and maybe a lot of other places too, these are all like kind of familiar concepts, maybe just without the neuroscience terms thrown in, like the idea that young people's brains aren't fully developed, or like trying to find alternative responses that aren't not a punitive response to addiction and mental illness. So like how are you approaching this differently, or maybe you're not approaching it differently than like Mary Moriarty has also like some of these ideas she has expressed about brain development. So how are you approaching this differently? What's different about you and the way you're talking about it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of the things that I challenge myself with and our students and our entire field. It's like, okay, what is the brain science gets you that all the other stuff that we already know doesn't already do? Juveniles are a really good example, because the Supreme Court has even said in a series of cases where they outlawed the death penalty for minors and life without the possibility of parole, that every parent knows that, and it doesn't have to be a parent, like everyone can just look out and see that, hey, 17-year-olds are different than 45-year-olds, at least on average. So what neuroscience adds, I think, and I'll talk a little about what I think is the same and different, is its greatest value when the behavioral science is unclear or doesn't give us enough. And in the realm of addiction, which you mentioned as well, there are places where it's not just the understanding, but the intervention. So medical assisted treatment is something that is really neuroscience driven, and that is something we've worked with in other jurisdictions. And it's kind of a weird thing, because as one prosecutor said in a meeting we were at, why would we want to give drugs to a drug addict? And I get that. And it's like, okay, it makes sense. But thinking about what might, and it's not just drugs, it's also other types of support, but thinking about the mechanisms that drive addiction and that also can lead to recovery, I think can help better understanding and better response. And I'll give one other concrete example, which is that, the road to recovery is often involves relapse. And so thinking about differently about probation and parole, the idea is less to pop someone for breaking a parole violation. Say if there were, a prohibition, as there usually are, against using again, and better understanding of how the trajectory may still be an upward one even without. So it's in part about explaining. It's sometimes about intervention and diction. And there are limits, though, and this is where I'll talk about the difference. There are real limits right now to what we know about neuroscience. Much of my work has been about, and our field's work has been about, what you can't say with neuroscience. And especially with respect to juveniles, on average, it's true that 17-year-old, 15-year-olds are different than later in life year-olds. But any particular individual, when you pull out, it's basically impossible for neuroscience to say what's going on in that individual's brain. And it's a place where I would be a little bit different than our current county attorney's regime by recognizing those limitations, focusing on the specific facts and circumstances of the case, and thinking a lot about community values and views. That it's, neuroscience and law, in my view, is not about some elite group of neuroscientists coming in and saying, this is the way we ought to do things. It's about providing new information, which the community and the prosecutor can be informed by, but can also say, here's what needs to happen here because this is what our community wants. So understanding the limits, I think, is just as important as understanding some of the opportunities for neuroscience.
So is this beyond, are you worried people will say that maybe this is beyond the role of a chief prosecutor, like make all these proclamations about, similar to Mary Moriarty, I think people are, the critics at least, are frustrated. The early intervention sounds good, sounds nice, but like in the end, you're in charge of a large office of prosecutors and not necessarily people who can do the intervention and do treatment. So what do you say to that? And like, how are you going to implement this kind of approach with a bunch of prosecutors who are not, they're not at the intersection of neuroscience and the law like you are?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do think there are limits to what the county attorney can do. The county attorney can, of course, be a bully pulpit and can partner and support other organizations and other county agencies that are doing a lot of the intervention. I will say this, that I think every prosecutor across the country in major cities has to decide what to do about the conundrum that we don't have sufficient mental health resources, and therefore a number of individuals who I think would be better placed in a non-criminal justice system end up in the system. So there's a group that's done some analysis, and this has a large part to do with deinstitutionalization of state psychiatric hospitals, which had some real challenges for just a separate story. But here in Minnesota, we had 11,500 state psychiatric hospital beds in the 1950s. We have 192 now, and they estimate that it's 15 times more likely if you have a serious or severe mental illness that you'll end up in jail rather than a sort of psychiatric ward. So the conundrum then is, we're not psychiatrists, we're lawyers. That's a prosecutor's office, not a mental health care facility. And yet, it has become the front lines of mental health care. And I think there are reasonable arguments on both sides. One that says, stick with purely the law and prosecuting. You should not be in the business of getting into mental health. I get that. In fact, some would argue the more that you try to get in the business of mental health, the more you begin to intertwine these two in ways that are really complicated and problematic. I take a different view, and here's why. I think in the near term, I don't see this other, kind of magic wand, mental health care, opportunity, safety net showing up. And I think the reality is that the criminal justice system has become in many ways a front line, not the only, but part of the front line of mental health care. It doesn't mean that prosecutors should become mental health care providers. They shouldn't. But the majority of what they do is negotiate plea deals. The latest data from Hennepin is like 96% of these deals are plea deals. So they're not, got to prosecute violent offense, do all that. But the vast majority of what the prosecutors are doing is negotiating a plea deal. And what I would want to see is better information informed by some of the things we've been talking about to inform those plea deals and the probation and parole that then happens, because a lot of those folks are not going to be incarcerated, or at least not for all that long. They're going back into community under supervision. That's the way that I see it working, to give better information to prosecutors to do their job. And much of their job is negotiating these deals. And I want to, that's why we're focused on safety. It's like, okay, what can we do to optimize safety, to reflect the values of the community, but also to make sure that whatever we do in the limited time they're with us in the justice system, it's less likely that they harm people once they're out.
Just to let people know where I'm coming from, I think I think the problem we probably have is that we're not solving crimes, and it's not necessarily that we're not punishing people harshly enough. But I can imagine people criticizing you, and I wonder if you've learned anything from watching Moriarty get pummeled for being like too progressive of a prosecutor. Like, are you going to use all this brain science to explain why this person should get lesser of a sentence or get diversion instead of just a traditional, send them off to prison? Have you learned anything from watching the politics play out with the current county attorney?
I have, and I'd also say that I believe just as much as the stick as the carrot, and I'm on record as saying this. And I will also say that the very first thing, like on our priorities page, or I guess the second thing, depending on how you view it, is improving clearance rates, which means getting the bad guy. And the second of the three things, and one is a moratorium on AI, the very first one is to create a clearance rate task force. The county attorney is not at the front lines of law enforcement. I think that's actually been one of the most problematic parts of the current regime is the disintegration, or at least significant deterioration of the relationship, the working relationship, the communication, the trust between local law enforcement and the county attorney's office. Because whether somebody wants the carrot or the stick to punish or rehabilitate, the individuals have to be in the system. And I was so struck when I saw our latest clearance rates in Minneapolis. Now, other parts of the county do better. All right, 68, 67% for homicide, which actually is better than the national average. When we get down to rape and robbery, 20%, aggravated assault, somewhere around 10, 11%, and car theft, which I recognize we handle only felony and above in Hennepin County, which is an indicative of how things are going, is 1%. And I've talked to so many people in Minneapolis who have told me, I've had one student who had her car stolen 3 times. Then just who works in my office. I said, but they never found the person. Like, no, got the car back, but never the person. So from a developmental perspective, one of the things that's really important is that there's some intervention, some punishment, and you can't do that if you don't catch the person. And this is like foundational. And I don't think I've heard our current county attorney talk enough about that as an issue. So yeah, I think that a lesson learned, but also one that I would have recommended from the beginning, and I've been saying this for a decade plus, is neuroscience is not just for public defenders. It's not just for ratcheting down. It's information that may in some cases lead to more harsh punishment or less, but it's additional information where you begin to say, okay, what's the best for the community in this particular case?
So I've heard Moriarty raise the issue of low clearance rates, but like, how do you as county attorney get police to solve more crimes and bring you more cases?
Yeah, and so the first thing to say is the county attorney is limited in what they can do. But the latest report from City of Minneapolis listed a number of things, some of which implicate the county attorney, and those include supporting law enforcement, both sort of behind the scenes and processing cases, but also publicly, because that supports trust and supports witnesses talking to the cops. That's really important. A second thing they talked about is better data integration and management of cases, which is important. When this county sees almost 15,000 cases a year, the scale issue is a very significant issue. There's no ability to just have tons of additional resources. And so when you're faced with that, it's understandable that there's triaging and that, you got your car stolen. Hey, anybody hurt? No? Okay, good luck. You can go online and you can submit your report. And then you can, go on with your life because nothing's going to happen. So I think really taking it seriously and prioritizing it. What I will say you can do is, with limited resources, every decision you make about where to assign your prosecutors and what projects to invest time in is really important, because the opportunity costs are significant. And that would be a very top priority for me. Would we, how much would we improve them? I think that's an open question, but I am absolutely convinced that with concerted effort, they could be improved, because I'm not of the belief that all of those car thieves are, Louvre, art theft kind of magicians. It's just that there's not enough time, energy, motivation to go after them. The last thing I'll say is that the reason that clearance rates are so important to me, again, at the top of my list, is that I think without addressing that, you begin to lose some of the public trust in the system overall, and that's a real concern.
So you mentioned the moratorium on AI, and it makes me wonder, like, how is a typical prosecutor? Maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but how would a prosecutor's office be using AI right now? Just the typical like research kind of stuff. What's going on inside these prosecutors' offices?
So I can tell you what was in the last budget, the reported budget 2024. They reported that they've spent on two systems, Axon and Everlaw. Axon is also used heavily by law enforcement. It does a lot of different things, including, only a geek like me noticed this, but when the county attorney opened up the portal for community members to upload video related to the Good and Pretty killings, it was an axon.com / /. So it can provide that kind of work as well. Everlaw is used, and this is probably how it's being used most regularly, for research, brief drafting, reviewing of briefs, and we're teaching those sorts of things to our law students as well. That is just happening across the board. It raises questions about hallucinations, and I've talked with the County Attorney Association where they are now addressing that statewide because there are briefs being submitted that have identified these hallucinations, meaning, if the audience doesn't know, a citation to a case that doesn't exist. The AI system just completely made it up. Moreover, it raises questions about the nature of the writing and the arguments and the evidence that are being mustered. The idea of artificial intelligence is that it is some non-human that's processing all these cases, coming up with the argument, putting it all together. And we need to know how that works. There's tremendous concern, that I and others have written about around bias, around inequities and so forth. And I'm not of the view that we'll never use these. I think we will, but not without training, rigorous training, and not without really clear ethical guidelines. Those may exist internally. I can't say. I haven't seen them publicly, but I think this is going to be a major issue for whoever's the next county attorney, because it's a major issue for every managing attorney just around the country and the world even.
So how should we feel about ICE operating in courthouses? We've seen some videos recently of that happening, and the line from our current county attorney is that if victims are, afraid to come to court and testify, witnesses don't want to come, then you don't get justice in those cases. Maybe you have to drop cases, or ICE takes the suspect away and they never get prosecuted at all, and there's no justice in those cases. Like, how do you feel about that?
I think it's really problematic for ICE to be in courthouses, and here's why. I'm a big believer in rule of law, and the irony in going to the courthouses is that you are penalizing those individuals who are following rule of law. They are showing up for their hearings, a status hearing. They are going through the steps that they are supposed to. And in fact, I can speak from personal experience that at least two of the individuals who were taken under there were now multiple events. I know why they were there. They were there with my friend. They were there for part on ongoing criminal trial that is just still ongoing. That needs to play out. They're in other removal proceedings. So I find it deeply problematic. I also find it problematic because it just is so indicative of the lack of communication, understanding, effectiveness of this operation, which of course, so many, I'm so glad to see being called down. But I think that's really problematic for them to be in courthouses of all places.
And so you would pledge not to work with ICE as the Hennepin County Attorney?
Well, certainly not in courthouses. And I think there are other ways in which there may be times when you would communicate with them. But and indeed, I think communicating with them is one way to keep them out of the courthouse. And I think our current sheriff and mayor have done a good job in sort of tampering this, and our governor as well, of intervening. So I think they've got to just be really clear lines of demarcation, but that's certainly one of them. You don't come into the courthouse, into the government center building, and grab people.
Do you think the system in Hennepin County has succeeded at providing accountability for youth crime and violence over the last handful of years? What would you do differently?
So a couple things I would do differently. One is I think there have been more than one incident where the community voices, especially those victims and victims' families, have not been weighted appropriately in the sort of calculus of what to do. And it's what I mentioned before of the limits of neuroscience. I mean, our current county attorney does cite to neuroscience regularly. She has in some of those cases. But the two issues I have are, one, we don't know about that particular individual's brain, so citing to general neuroscience is a little problematic. And two, it's just an additional piece of information. It's not dispositive. And those community voices are tremendously important. So I don't think we've done a good enough job of responding. The second is that I do think there's a place for more discipline. I don't think discipline's a bad word. And, I've talked about this, that you offer an off-ramp, but if the off-ramp to violence isn't taken, then there's a stick. And I think that's an appropriate response, even for a younger person. So, I don't know how people want to characterize that as, more strict or more law and order or not. But I think it's actually consistent with the science to, under certain facts and circumstances, come out with a much stronger penalty, even if the individual is younger.
Did you follow the Ricky Cobb shooting and the decisions made around potentially prosecuting and eventually dropping the case against the state trooper? Like, I was very frustrated that we never had the conversation about what I thought was like poor tactics. I'm not in law enforcement, but seemed like a very mishandled traffic stop at the least. And I think people were so wrapped up in defending the state trooper and attacking Mary Moriarty. I feel like there was a police accountability conversation to be had there, whether you think it should have been prosecuted or not. Like, what did you think of that case and how it was handled?
Yeah. So first of all, I thought, and I think I've said this, so I'm on record somewhere probably as saying it, that I didn't think the prosecution should have gone forward. So I agree with the ultimate outcome, which was to drop the charges. I was also concerned with the expenditure of funds for an external consultancy or firm with a significant cost. I don't remember what the exact cost was. It was significant. That said, anytime someone dies in a law enforcement officer involved shooting, or not shooting, but even just sort of set of actions, I think it calls for a significant discussion. And one of my concerns about our sort of current conversation around all officer-involved shootings is that there seem to be two options: not guilty of anything, like completely scot-free, or prosecute to the hilt and first-degree murder or something like that. The law, is really, it's tough to win on these cases. I think my colleague Amy Sweezy, now at the law school, but 30 years in the Hennepin County Attorney's office, anything she says, I really pay a lot of attention to. She's an expert, and she's been telling a lot of folks on news, and I think it's been great public education. These are some of the toughest cases to prosecute. And so I hope that we can get to a place where we can see opportunities for reform and conversation, and sitting down and saying, how do we make sure this stuff never happens again, or is really rare to happen again, even if there's not a prosecution? And on the other side, understanding, hey, okay, maybe there wasn't a prosecution here, but that doesn't absolve the situation entirely either. Focusing just on criminal charges as a response, I think hamstrings us into what we can do, because those charges, if they're dropped or they go away, it feels like, okay, there's nothing left to talk about. And I think that kind of, again, limits us in where we can move forward.
I think a lot of people would say, like, the problem has been the disinclination to prosecute police historically. Like, they're chummy with the prosecutor's office. They work together on a lot of cases, and so a prosecutor is just not very inclined to prosecute the police. Like, how should people expect you to fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I'd say we go where we think the law and the facts go, and trying to be as, everyone's got their biases, I'm sure. That's like, I'm a neuroscience kind of law person, so I have to recognize that. But as best we can to be on the facts and on the law. And like any other case, if after reviewing them carefully, seems we can prove this thing beyond a reasonable doubt, then we do. And if not, we don't. And the political consequences be damned in either case. And I don't come at this clearly as a politician. I'm not running because it's been my life goal to move up the ranks of political world. I really think deeply about criminal justice and the ways that I hope we can innovate it. And these types of cases are important, and they're important to me to do the right way as best we can down the middle.
We have seen so much out of control law enforcement in the past. That's an understatement. In the past month or two, 2 people killed by federal agents. The man shot through his front door, and then federal agents are lying about it. We've seen the pendulum swing after George Floyd. It was like, a global movement for police accountability, and then crime goes up, and there's a backlash, and it's more law and order politics. And now, are we swinging back to the politics of hold people accountable in law enforcement?
I hope so. I mean, we were out at the DFL caucuses, and I had 60 seconds. Put in that 60 seconds. One thing I wanted them to know, and I said, I hope this is what every county attorney candidate is telling you, is that we will gather that evidence, review it, and if warranted, prosecute to the full extent of the law any ICE agent, who, not just the ones who've killed our 2 community members, but others who've committed other crimes. You've referenced some of them. I think there are probably many more potentially. There are, with the federal agents, as you know, issues around supremacy clause and some additional hurdles. But and I'll give Mary credit for this. She's right. There's nothing called absolute immunity. And so you deal with the immunity issue, but it really goes to reasonableness. That's the line we were on, that we're on. So I would hope that every county attorney candidate would say that they would do the same thing. I don't know where everyone is and who's stated publicly or not, but that certainly would be my position.
So it's a 2-part question here. How do you imagine you'll be different from Mary Moriarty? And then how do you think you'll be the same?
Yeah, I think differences that will have a couple things. Stronger relationship with law enforcement. That's really important to me. I am not aware nationally or even internationally of any progressive, centrist, whatever justice reform that hasn't involved really strong partnership with law enforcement. And I don't know exactly what has gone wrong. What I can say that I've talked with a lot of law enforcement leaders, and they're just real concerns with this current leadership. So that's one. And I think it's foundational to doing the things that I want to do. Second thing is that, and I've already talked about it, the way that we use science and the way that we use neuroscience will not be about sort of blanket propositions for everyone in a certain group, but really will it be about individualization. That is the key. It's what I've been arguing for a decade plus. A third thing is that we really want to focus on a lot of these proven effective strategies. And one of the things that I think is problematic is by law, every county attorney has to write out their policy for sentencing, kind of sentencing policy. At present, that policy requires prosecutors to consider the race and the age of the defendant. I think that's considering race is unconstitutional, whether you want to do it or not. I think it's unconstitutional, so we will stop doing that. I also wouldn't want to consider the race of the individual. There are racial disparities, but I don't think the way to do that is by sort of looking at a defendant and creating a sentence based on their race. So that would be a third major difference. Areas of agreement, there are some really cool pilot programs going on in the county attorney's office in Hennepin County. One that I love is called All Rise. It has to do with first-time DUI offenders, and one judge is doing that. And the basic idea is that traditionally, when a first-time DUI offense comes in, if nobody's been hurt, it's standard sentence, suspended sentence for a little bit, a few other things, some training, etc. The challenge is that some of those individuals who drove drunk on Tuesday night just made a dumb decision, and they're never going to do it again after this experience in the justice system. But some have an addiction, and they are going to do it again and again and again. And what if we could tell the difference? And here's the thing, we can. This wonderful program, All Rise, are operating in Duluth and a little bit here, as they describe it, can separate the 1/3 from the 2/3 through a pretty short screening test. Innovations like that are really appealing to me. I would love to do that and expand it more and do it beyond just addiction. A second thing that's happening that I think is good is some of the youth intervention. You already mentioned it. Carjackings are down. That's a good thing. Would want to continue to do that. And there is some good work as well around the conviction integrity unit, which I think has been a point of emphasis for the county attorney and should be a point of emphasis for everyone. If we have convicted innocent people in the past, those wrongs need to be rectified.
So with racial disparities, I imagine you are concerned with that. So how do you handle that without taking someone's race into account?
Yeah, I think you look at the social determinants of harmful behavior and you say, all right, what are the cluster of things that cause someone, it's the basic question, cause someone to do this bad thing. It's the basic question I want to ask. Why did you do this thing you did? And if we can have a better understanding of that, the intervention, the sentence can be better. And I just refuse to believe that the answer that someone did something is they did it because of their color of their skin. Now, it's not to say it isn't related. I mean, I study this stuff. It's actually clear that it's related to a whole bunch of inequities. But in terms of response, I want to think about, what are the levers that we can pull? And one of those levers may be incarceration also, going back to what you asked before, but our bevy of things that we can do. I just don't think that asking about, making race a center point of sentencing, as I said, I don't think it's constitutional, but I also don't think it's smart policy.
Is it inevitable that you come into conflict with law enforcement? Like, I kind of want a county attorney who at some point is in conflict with some police chief somewhere, because they're not all universally reasonable people in law enforcement. Like, you can't support law enforcement all the time, right?
No, I don't think you can support any group all the time. And so our question is, are you on board with this idea that we ought to optimize safety? And if you're operating outside the rule of law, first of all, that'd be a problem. And secondly, if you're doing things that we think are, that I think as the county attorney, are not keeping your community safer, then yeah, that would be a point of conflict for sure.
So let's talk about some reforms from the current regime, and if you would maintain them, keep them going. The first one is the policy on youth interrogation, and I'll explain that a little bit for listeners. Ensuring an attorney is present, because often young people don't understand the importance of that. Not using statements extracted by police with tactics that are known to induce false confessions, and then, to the extent possible, no interrogation in school settings. Is that a good policy?
That's a great policy. That is a policy that is really consistent with decades of psychology research and neuroscience research. And it's a policy that enhances safety. It's not like we're just going to be soft. And here's why. If you can't trust the quality of the information you get from interrogations, that can affect investigations, and it can certainly affect the outcomes of trials where you're trying to go after, identify the individual who actually did the harm, and then prosecute them. So it's and to be clear, it's not about not interrogating juveniles. It's doing it in a way that's more likely to get you effective information and help your search for the truth. So we'd absolutely do that. It's a really good policy.
Okay. And then the other one, no longer prosecuting most felony cases arising from certain low-level traffic stops, like equipment violations and expired tabs. I believe this is almost the same as what they do in Ramsey County too. Do you like that one?
I do not like that one, and I'll tell you why. And it is what County Attorney Choi does, and I would tell him that as well. And the reason I don't like it is that I don't think that again, my bar is, does it keep the community safer? I don't think it does. It turns out in some of these cases you end up learning something you didn't know before. And that something could be really important. In these cases, boy, there's a felony level offense. I think that in those cases, now whether or not you prosecute every single one, that's to be determined on a case-by-case basis. But to make a blanket statement that you're not going to prosecute, I think is really really problematic, because I think some of those definitely need to be prosecuted for the good of safety in the community.
So I think proponents would say there's flexibility built into the policy for discretion like that. You disagree?
That's certainly not the headline. I would say maybe there's not enough flexibility, but in general, my view is that if you've identified individuals and through constitutional means, so I think the arguments, others would say, well, it's not constitutional, it's some sort of protectual stop. I think that it is information that we should act on and evidence we should act on, and prosecutions for felonies should go forward. So I do disagree with those policies in both Ramsey and Hennepin.
And then I forget exactly what the stat was. Maybe you would know and be able to correct me, but like 99% of these traffic stops are not leading to anything fruitful. So the idea is, even if my stat is wrong, like this is not a tactic that is a good use of police resources. Like there's racial disparities built into it, and it's not a fruitful use of time necessarily. Like the safety dividends just aren't there. Do you disagree with that?
There's something to that. I'd say it's part of a broader conversation about what it means to have police in community. I will say this, that having some of those traffic stops can lead to conversations, that are productive. Now, I take the point that many may not, but I think it's part of a broader conversation of what is our community's views on what the best ways for police to be involved in our communities are. And I think police ought to be involved in our communities. I think they ought to be stopping into community centers and saying hi, and being members of community, and not just at times when they're making an arrest or doing an investigation. So I take the point that sitting and trying to go after someone's taillight when there are about 5 other things to be done may be an inefficient use of resources. And again, that's something that, I'd want to, although this is not the chief law enforcement officer in the county, it's certainly someone who is working with law enforcement heavily, and want to have those discussions about, all right, like, how do you keep communities safest, and is this really the best use of resources? So there's something there, but I think is probably part of a larger conversation.
So put on your pundit hat for a moment, and the masked secret police issue. We've had, I think it was California passed a law about masks, and maybe there was some trouble with, like, they didn't include the rule for their own law enforcement, and so it was like thrown out by a judge. But like, is that a thing you can implement and actually have it enforced in Minnesota? Because it's we had the assassin last year pretending to be law enforcement, and now it's about 1,000 times easier to do that because we are so used to seeing truckloads of paramilitaries just zooming up and down the streets, and like people are blowing whistles, but like the police don't bat an eye because everyone assumes, well, if there's a truckload of right-wing militia types, it must be federal agents. And I feel like that's unacceptable.
Well, I agree with you that it's unacceptable. I mean, I go back to our start of our conversation, the cruelty, the brutality, the lack of community engagement that has been shown by federal ICE officials over the last X number of weeks and months has just been deeply disappointing. So to your question, I think it's definitely worth trying and then fighting in the courts. There'll be some legal pushback and some adjustments that need to be made, but it's foundational. That's what I was just saying about having law enforcement community, that there be a trust reestablished. That trust is going to be hard to reestablish at this point. I do think it's important to try and distinguish between local law enforcement and the federal ICE agents who were here. And I talked to a lot of, I talked to ICE agents too, just on the ground at the protest. I talked with a lot of local law enforcement who were, there, especially when they were the ones who were, maintaining some of the evidentiary scenes. And, a lot of the local law enforcement folks I talked to, rank and file to even chiefs, were express their own frustration that this isn't what they wanted to be doing on their, on that day. And I'm hopeful that there's the potential for local communities and local law enforcement to come together after all of this and say, you know what, here are all the ways that we're different than ICE. And one of those ways is that you see who we are. And it's not just that you see who we are when we're wearing the uniform, it's you see who we are because, hey, I'm also your daughter's softball coach, and I'm also shopping with you in groceries, and you like that to me is community policing. It's this integration. Now, tons of bridges to cross to get from where we are to there, but one of them would be regulations like that, like the one you mentioned. So it'll be interesting to see what this current legislature can try and do here in Minnesota, and we'll see where it goes. But I'd certainly be in favor of things like that. More transparency is really important.
This is not necessarily a question, more of a comment, but you can respond if you want. I was so frustrated when the police chiefs gave that press conference about their cops, off-duty cops being stopped by ICE, and it was racial profiling, their cops of color being stopped by ICE. And I think every one of them got up there and said, this is just a small element within the operation, the federal operation, that is behaving this way. And I'm thinking, no, the problems we're seeing are systemic. And it's very frustrated. I don't know if they were pretending to be ignorant of this to make nice with ICE, or if they really did not see this as a systemic problem. But I was very unhappy with the police chief's response to that, even though they were coming out to defend their cops ostensibly. This is top down. This is coming from the top to the lower ranks. Yes, it's okay to behave this way, I think.
Yeah, I would just say that I have been just absolutely appalled by what I've seen by ICE. I mean, with my own eyes, and feet away, and I have not, trailed them, so I haven't seen. When I say that, I mean just how they're treating protesters, peaceful protesters, and then many colleagues have been observing other things, and it's absolutely a systemic issue, and it was by design. I mean, this is all by design, and it's a disconcerting use and enabled by technology as well. I mean, I gave an interview with Kara Levin where I was talking about being down at a protest, and everyone's got their phones, but ICE had its camera as well, because with Palantir and everyone else, they're putting us into the database. And there are incidents in the state where they were using their mobile technology to identify someone that the AI system told them was a threat. This guy actually has his passport, so you've got real data, real time, saying no, I'm not, and they didn't care, right? They just went with the data. So I mean, it's problematic on just about every level, and we have to fight back, and the county attorney is part of that fight. Again, I hope that doesn't separate. I hope that all county attorney candidates would be saying very similar things on that front, and that wouldn't be a separation point.
So we're coming to the end here, but yeah. I'm making guesses about you, what kind of person you are, based on the kind of campaign material you're putting out, and I want to know: are you a tech person in your personal life?
Not really.
No, not really. The neuro law guy, the guy who's an expert on AI and the law is not an early adopter of technology.
I still read the hard copy newspaper. That's how I get my news, the Star Tribune. I had never posted on social media once until this campaign, and the campaign staff said, "You absolutely have to do that." I said, "Okay."
Are you doing it yourself, though? Are you in control of the social media?
I write the stuff, and then the X actually, I post everything. I said, I can do a couple of these things, and I can record them. You're going to have to press some of the buttons here, kids.
This is not a good era to be getting into social media for the first time. We're at the low point of social media, so I imagine your replies are a mess.
It's been interesting, but so I don't. I'm there. I have a smartphone, and I use those things, but. No, I mean, I think a lot of what I study has made me really cautious about a lot of stuff. I sometimes say that, and in the world of neuroscience, there's just all these folks who start hawking things and selling things, and it's a bunch of crap, most of it. So what I really am excited about is the future possibilities of using some of these tools, but using them appropriately and ethically. And I'm not. I think I'm probably just in the middle. I'm not a first adopter on a lot of stuff.
Okay, I would not have guessed that. I would have thought you were Mr. Technology. Like you probably have 5 phones and you're just looking at them all day.
No, I in fact, that's been one of the things that the campaign staff yell at me about, is that I'm way behind on those things. I just I've just been unplugged in a lot of ways. I like being in general unplugged, and I like being I'm suspicious of a lot of the technology that's out there, I guess.
Okay. Is there anything you wanted to say that we didn't come to and cover?
I think we've covered a bunch. I guess I would just say that I hope. Well, first of all, I really thank you for having the platform, and I hope that folks remember there's Hennepin County Attorney's race. One of the things that's been interesting being out there is, and these are even calling folks who, they say, hey, these are pretty knowledgeable folks, and they're like, oh, so you're running against Mary? I'm like, no, actually, Mary's not running. Or they'll say, oh, wait, is that the U.S. attorney? Or and just folks just don't know. And so I really, I thank you for the platform. Thanks for giving everyone a chance to learn more about this race and the candidates, and whoever people vote for. I hope you do vote and get out there and ask us all tough questions, and we'll be all the better for it.
Are you seeking the DFL endorsement? I forgot to ask.
We are. Yeah, we've gone through this. We're in that process.
It's been quite a time to have a series of experienced, smart lawyer types come on and talk, because our system is collapsing right now.
There are very, very significant concerns about our basic core rule of law assumptions and values, and this position is one of them, not the only one, but one of many where people need to step up and recognize that. I agree with that.
Well, thank you, Francis Shen, who's running for Hennepin County Attorney. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you all for listening. And that's the end of the show. This has been the Wedge Live podcast.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.